Guys, I'm a really big fan of Deltarune, probably to an unhealthy degree. Seriously, I'm absolutely obsessed with this game. The gameplay, the story, the atmosphere, the endless realm of secrets, theories, and possibilities. I absolutely adore it, but that doesn't mean I'm not willing to criticize it. And it also doesn't mean I'm not open to others criticizing it. While I do think that this game is absolutely phenomenal, it is by no means perfect, but nonetheless it manages to be an incredibly captivating and immersive experience that anyone can pick up and enjoy if they so choose. One of the many popular elements of this game are the Shadow Crystal bosses. Every chapter in Deltarune has one of these, and they're all connected by this intricate pattern of having broken dreams, represented through none other than the Shadow Crystals themselves, or the desire to attain freedom. These bosses are beloved for their mysterious nature as characters, and they leave one wondering what greater connection each of them will inevitably have to the overall story, resulting from the creation of the pure crystal, a powerful item that can only be formed when 5 shadow crystals are bound together. 5 broken dreams, forming something whole again. We've got Njevel, the jester who talked to a strange someone, making him go insane, while also giving him a higher standpoint of knowledge over his fellow Darkners. He believes that he is the only truly free one in a world full of caged people. Spamton is a tragic salesman who talked to a strange someone on the phone, making him go insane and forcing him to live in the streets of Cyber City. The Roaring Knight is an incredibly mysterious and heavily debated character who drops a shadow crystal as well, perhaps symbolizing a broken dream of their own that we have yet to learn about. The Hammer of Justice, better known as the resurrected Gerson Boom, is a beloved, wise author whose crystal he did not originally have, similar to Spamton. Unlike the previous 3 bosses, he's all there mentally, having already obtained his own form of freedom, simply wishing to help others obtain theirs through any means necessary. With the release of Deltarune Chapter 5, I was really looking forward to the secret boss, especially considering the build up towards this one as the final Shadow Crystal holder, and contemplating how meaningful the previous 4 had been in their own ways to understanding Deltarune's nature as a diegetic lore infested video game. There was no doubt in my mind that Toby Fox would deliver excellently for the final Shadow Crystal boss in the game. Whether it was Woody, or Friend, or whoever, I knew I was going to love it. Unfortunately, I was wrong. Listen, everyone, I loved Deltarune Chapter 5 overall. I found it to be a really fun and captivating and subversive experience, and a mostly worthy successor to what came before it, despite its faults. One of the main reasons I say mostly is because of none other than the secret boss itself, and how flawed I believe this character is. My intention in making this video isn't just to hate for the sake of hating, or for the sake of putting others down. My goal also isn't to say that the way I would correct Toby Fox's writing means that I am an objectively better writer, or that I could create a better secret boss, because I probably couldn't. If you liked the secret boss in this chapter, I don't want to take that away from you or make you feel like it's wrong to feel that way in any circumstance. I wouldn't even call it a bad boss necessarily. My intent is simply to explain exactly why I didn't like this boss and why I believe it's the weakest Shadow Crystal boss the game has received. This video will be broken down into 3 major sections where I tackle all the major aspects of this boss, analyzing areas I believe this boss to be both strong and weak in. I'll be taking a look at the boss itself, and how it stands among the story of Chapter 5, and I will also be giving lots of comparisons to past secret bosses to support my argument for why this boss just doesn't work nearly as well as it could have, at least in my opinion. First, let's talk about the build-up this chapter gives for its titular Shadow Crystal boss. I believe it's the weakest of any chapter so far, as I mentioned previously. The first time you actually meet this character is in the shop in the cliffs, and she actually has some pretty interesting dialogue there, where she expresses her former loneliness and gushes over the beautiful sunset, explaining that it was a nice breath of fresh air from her origin, where all she could see were darker, more bland colors. The sunset is what gave her a new sense of belonging and a desire to make and keep friends in a more colorful reality that was brought about by the Dark Fountain. She also speaks of Asgar's happiness and encourages Chris to be happy for him in his new reality, which is one of many signs throughout this chapter, along with others in the shop, that make the player and Chris reconsider if the Dark World's existing is truly as bad as Ralsei claims it to be. This sets up a meaningful encounter later on through mysterious and compelling shop dialogue, which is a trait that previous secret bosses had as well. It really got me excited for the fight later on, which I assumed would take place because of Pink's desire to keep her friendships clashing with the Fun Gang's mission to steal the fountain. She states that she isn't quite ready to leave her friends yet. Pink also has interesting dialogue regarding her philosophy about self-definition. She believes that her body is what defines her, which connects to Deltarune's continuing to place relevance in its themes about self-determination on one's own path. Susie believes she can defy the final prophecy, and Rouse is re-evaluating himself as a person to choose who he and potentially others want him to be, rather than simply who the prophecy says he should be. Pink fits right along with the main characters thematically in this sense, and I think this shop does a really good job of preparing you for one final Shadow Crystal boss send-off and a mature fight that, like Gerson's fight, encourages self-determination and expression through one's characteristics, body type, and personality. But my expectations were relatively short-lived. Upon interacting with the pink door at the top level of the Flower Castle without the key, Susie and Ralse will have dialogue that appears to be written with the intention of hyping up the player for what lies beyond the door. With the line, "A secret guy," Toby Fox actively sets the player's expectations that there will be a secret boss behind this door. Lines like, "A new dad for Lancer," or "A brand new friend," jokingly set expectations for the fight. While the first line from Susie is fully satire, the second from Ralse seems to be conveying Toby Fox's awareness about his fan expectations for the secret boss, actively building up their hopes, as he could be referring to either the cowboy character resembling the friend inside me shitpost, or the strange cat-like entity known as image_friend in the files. Upon entering, Ralse wonders if whoever is inside will have a unique and memorable theme. This is Toby Fox purposefully teasing his fans, as they should know what to expect at this point. But why break that wall in the first place? It makes the game immersion fall flat. While Deltarune is a very diegetic video game, it often relates to how the world in and of itself functions like a video game world and the knowledge of some characters. It rarely ever uses this diegetic nature to buy into fan hype and set expectations in this manner, so casually as well. With a fight like the Three Mikes battle from Chapter 4, it is very clearly a fight that teases fan interpretations and theories on who Mike is, but then it cleverly connects afterwards to the idea that even the characters in the game are unsure who Mike is. This battle isn't used in a way that's meant to insult fans of the game for theorizing or having incorrect ideas or even to set expectations. It simply takes fan ideas and connects them to a related idea within the game itself that will possibly get expanded on in some way later, while also providing a fun and optional fight for players to discover. With Chapter 5's secret boss, the gentle, lighthearted teasing is much less subtle. To build up fan expectations as directly as possible surrounding a much more serious idea such as the Shadow Crystal bosses, only to subvert expectations with something completely different and much less dark is quite odd to say the least. It almost feels like Toby Fox himself doesn't take his secret bosses nearly as seriously as we originally believed, which sort of makes all of this build-up in the line of secret bosses feel like it wasn't given the payoff it deserved, and it hurts, just making the experience with all the bosses more disappointing in the end, especially with this boss. While many of the previous secret bosses were played for humor in some way, it was done very cleverly, and it was typically in such a way that felt unsettling in the realm of insanity, to keep these bosses darker, more tragic characters in the narrative. While Gerson wasn't insane, and had many funny moments associated with him, these funny moments are orchestrated with the intention for Gerson to build connections with the Fun Gang in a lighthearted manner, so we can get closer to them, providing them with valuable information in the process. So while Gerson wasn't insane or unsettling like the other three, his intentions were rooted in something far more meaningful and serious in the end, subverting the prophecy and allowing the Fun Gang to pave their own paths to victory. The secret boss of Chapter 5, on the other hand, is set up as a significantly more lighthearted fight, but without the subversive wit and unsettling nature that made all the previous secret bosses so memorable and aesthetically interesting, not to mention the lack of screen time compared to some other secret bosses. This time around, the secret boss completely breaks away from the more serious undertone of the previous bosses and plays itself primarily for humor and vibes that are likely to mainly appeal to fans of niche anime, rather than Toby's entire audience. That doesn't necessarily mean that the boss doesn't have any sort of deeper connection with another element of the story. It does, but I found that this connecting element to be relatively weak as well. That's something I'll bring up later, though. This boss's music consists of Japanese vocals with the intention of displaying a Hatsune Miku feel, and the boss includes subsections about dating simulators. Isn't it better to create a boss that you can almost guarantee will appeal to the whole audience of your work, and not simply fans who create that aesthetic with a burning passion? In terms of originality, Toby has created a Mimi boss fight before in the 2018 Switch release of Undertale, which has a very similar premise of a ghost trying to fuse with the body they discovered. For fans such as myself who have already played this fight on the Switch version, we were certainly shocked by Deltarune Chapter 5 Secret Boss, and many of us loved it, but others certainly craved something more original character-wise than aesthetic-wise. That's not to say there isn't any creativity in this fight, but in my opinion, that creativity was used in the wrong way entirely. Instead of sending off the Shadow Crystal bosses with a worthy and masterful contingent finale to what their legacy had been built up to that point, we were instead greeted with something that tried to completely reinvent the wheel and change everything last minute, seemingly only for the sake of subverting fan expectations, as I explained with the way this fight was actually built up. To actually enter the pink door and fight the boss, you must collect 10 of the 19 pink coins hidden throughout the chapter in the thrilling 2D platforming sections all about, mostly, and buy the mystery key from the mysterious shopkeeper and unlock it. During Chapter 5, we only see 7 Flowey-esque flowers in the basement of Asgore's shop, and before reaching the door to the secret boss, we meet all 7 of these flowers. So fans would be able to deduce that the secret boss could not possibly be one of them. Yet, when we actually enter the secret boss door and meet up with Orange, she reveals that she secretly had an older sister this entire time. Pink, the 8th flower. This is an example of a sort of long-lost relative trope at its finest. Pink was never once mentioned by any of the other characters beforehand, making this connection feel uninspired and thrown in, rather than natural. While Pink does have a line of dialogue in her shop specifically connecting her to Orange, why does this heartfelt connection get expanded upon by a fight of this nature? Fighting someone because they quote-unquote bullied your sister is some kind of joke of the motivation and isn't rooted in anything actually meaningful like it was for previous secret bosses. Gerson with his teachings, the Knight with whatever the hell was going on in Chapter 3, Spamton with his desire for freedom through Chris's soul, and Jevel's established desire to inflict chaos on others and play games. Pink simply fights the fun game because they reportedly bullied Orange, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of deeper reason for this. This makes it a pretty lame reason for the fight to take place in the grand scheme of trying to tell a story, even if it makes a bit of sense in context with the Fun Gang having lightly teased Orange in the past. It seems like this fight was far more intended just to be fun than having anything to do with the story. Now, let's actually examine the fight dialogue-wise and see how well it truly continues off of the shop dialogue in a meaningful manner. Shouldn't the fight itself connect to Pink's newfound value in friendship and her philosophy about self-determination through her own body? Let's see if it does. Immediately starting off, Pink's tone and way of speaking is very similar to that of Mad Mew Mew from Undertale, which contributes to my overall feelings of this fight seeming unoriginal character-wise and aesthetic-wise. The tone is played for humor with how she reacts to the simplest things within the fight. Our first line of interesting dialogue is when she explains that before she found the anime Catgirl body, she was a ghost, and that her newfound friendships and enemies gave her validation as a person. This does continue off of the shop dialogue, but seems to be presented in this sort of style that's played for humor to play off of the cliche power and value of friendship trope, rather than providing a meaningful basis for an emotional boss fight. In the same chapter, Flowery, the main antagonist, uses a similar trope to give him strength mentally and physically, and he uses it as one of his primary reasons for wanting to keep the Dark World open. But these reasons are conveyed in a much more serious and heartfelt tone, showing that he truly does care for others and wants his flower friends to be happy living in their special paradise along with Asgore. Flowery, just like Pink, is a character who is also primarily played for humor in the realm of cliche anime tropes. That as we spend more time around him throughout the chapter, he becomes a compelling character with the most dimension out of any antagonist we have seen in the game thus far, which repels him far beyond the stereotypes he seems to represent at first. The Pink boss fight actively feeds into these stereotypes and cliches as much as possible in order to give the character a humorous effect, and also to appeal to fans who actually enjoy characters of this nature. As someone who isn't remotely interested in anime, Flowery was a character that greatly subverted my expectations and became much more than just a walking joke. So why didn't Toby Fox apply that same level of depth in writing and character emotion and relevance in the Shadow Crystal boss? To give another character comparison, let's take a look at the Mad Mew Mew fight from Undertale. This boss was added as a secret in Sansa Papyrus' basement on the Switch version of the game, and had a very similar premise of a ghost finding this Catgirl body and wanting to fuse with it. Except that time, it was with a previously established character, Mad Dummy, who was looking for a body that suited her. The anime catgirl body she found was so appealing to her own personal tastes and values as a person that she was able to fuse with it at the end of the boss fight with Frisk's help by giving her the spark she needed to fully embrace the body, serving as a subversive and subtle allegory for transgender identity in an already very LGBTQ-oriented game that did not originally have a transgender archetype, or at least not one that had more than a few lines of dialogue. In Deltarune, the pink fight seems to be about something completely different and far less compelling narratively, which, as previously mentioned, is a stark contrast from the deeper story relevance of each of the previous secret bosses. The buildup of every previous character was significantly more frightening and or serious and much more connected to the boss fights, stories, and appeals that the characters were going for. But here, it almost seems like the buildup I previously explained was purposefully misleading, simply for the sake of shaking things up, rather than for continuing and expanding on a previously established pattern that worked for more than 7 years. Anyways, after the one interesting line of dialogue I previously mentioned, the rest of the dialogue in this fight is in reference to the fight mechanics themselves, and Pink's misunderstanding that the characters are interested in stealing the body she found. Throughout the fight, Pink argues with the personality that was already contained within the body. This actually does connect to Chris's own personal struggle with the player in a way that is just the right amount of obvious, not being too subtle, but not being too obvious either. It indirectly encourages them to embrace themselves and therefore make peace with us by the end instead of trying to fight us. While characters like Ralsei provide the notion that people with their own thoughts and feelings do not deserve to be controlled by an outside force, with the idea that both body and soul are needing for a functioning being also coming into play. This very possibly is foreshadowing something and will lead to something incredibly important and interesting later involving Chris. And I actually like this theming for the fight. But once again, why does this development have to be conveyed through the least serious secret boss fight? It feels like this dynamic between Chris and the player isn't being given the proper tone by characters other than Chris, at least not yet. The first time it's being resembled through other characters in the game at all is with this anime cat girl whose internal personality is too loving while she is too harsh. Meanwhile, Chris views the issue in the opposite light and would likely not take the theming of the fight to heart themselves. Chris hates us and would have no current reason to embrace us as a part of them. It feels like the bones of something potentially compelling are there, but they're just being conveyed in the wrong way completely, and it makes this fight all the more disappointing and underutilized thematically. While the finale section of the fight with Pink having a mental breakdown over the conflicting personalities, feeling like a puppet on strings, really felt like the kind of stuff I wanted to see more of from the entire secret boss. It takes a bit of a darker twist for the end and provides a message for the player themselves to consider whether puppeteering Chris is moral or not. But this darker twist isn't given enough time to breathe after the fight, as Pink is instantly played for humor again as she conveys her desire to stay in the anime catgirl body that fits her tastes, rather than having to die simply because the fun gang needs to seal the fountain. Compare this to Spamton and the tone of his character after the completion of the fight. Pink gives the fun gang the shadow crystal, formed off of a broken dream that Pink herself cannot explain, which does fall in line with the mysterious nature of the crystals. The moment after the fight where you get to purchase the flower items in order to have a stronger chance at saving the world out of the flower's loving nature is something I found to be much more compelling overall than anything that took place during the Pink fight. Once again, I do think that the backbone was here for something far more interesting, but the darker, compelling tone that this fight could have mastered along with the first 3 Shadow Crystal bosses is lost. Because unlike Jevil, Spamton, and the Knight, Pink does not commit to the darker tone that made the first 3 Shadow Crystal bosses a hit within the community, and instead deviates from a much more compelling setup that was provided in the shop in the Cliffs. The pieces were there, and Toby Fox, even being the great writer that he typically is, simply didn't commit. He didn't commit to making the fight almost fully unserious either, like the 3 Mikes fight from Chapter 4. Pink's sort of lesson for the characters is, as previously mentioned, entirely contained to Chris. I could potentially connect to something much greater later on, but does not currently do their situation tonal justice. Now, with all the negative things I've said about this fight, would you believe me if I told you that I actually really enjoyed this fight gameplay-wise? Yeah, as much of a disappointment as I consider it to be story-wise and theme-wise, I do think that the boss itself is really well made. Every gimmick that the fight brings to the table is well executed, riveting, and just fun to play around with. I was ecstatic about the Purple Soul mechanic finally getting used, and all the new ideas it brought to the table along with it were well worth the wait in gameplay. I haven't talked about the music much either. I don't really care for it, but I do think that my personal distaste in this style of music isn't actually a problem with the track itself. And my disliking is fully based on something contained to myself, rather than objective criticism I'm bringing to the table. In other words, there's nothing wrong with this fight musically, I just don't like the music. And while that does absolutely contribute to my overall disliking of this boss, despite finding it fun mechanically, I won't use it in any sort of argument to say that the boss is objectively weak. Overall, the secret boss of Deltarune is a massive disappointment, in my opinion. While it does offer the player a great time gameplay-wise, it actively shoots down the legacy established by the previous Shadow Crystal bosses, utilizes misleading build-up, doesn't fully expand on its own themes or commit to being fully serious or unserious, and offers aesthetics that are significantly more on the side, being personally pleasing to players interested in media of a similar type, rather than something anyone could enjoy. If you like this secret boss, that's completely okay, as I said in the beginning of the video. My goal isn't to convince you not to like the secret boss, but for some interesting discussion in the comments, and so I can improve my own personal understanding of this boss, I'm interested in why people like this secret boss specifically. Is it the music, the gameplay, the aesthetics, Pink's physical design and personality? What specifically do all of you enjoy so much about this fight that I didn't, and why did you enjoy those parts? You may have any reason you choose to like this boss or agree with me in disliking it, but I would encourage anyone watching this video to evaluate everything the boss has to offer on your own terms. Just because something is pleasing to you in certain ways doesn't make the writing and backstory surrounding that thing objectively good, and vice versa applies as well. I'm sure you could make a compelling argument about why the secret boss works, and maybe is even the best in the game. And hey, maybe one of your responses will convince me, but I'll be deleting any hateful or overly negative comments or responses that extend beyond constructive criticism or a valid comeback. But with all of that said, thank you for watching.